We are here at SECO for the evening part of the Summer University on European Citizenship. We've had an extremely interesting day at the Free University of Brussels with some very noted guests and speakers like judges from the European Court of Justice, heads of unit of the European Commission, MEPs planned for both today and tomorrow. But now we've come here to SECO, which is an innovative co-working space planned as a nest of ideas to fight Euroscepticism and the democratic deficit of the European Union. And as part of it, one of the 3 sessions we have planned today is a masterclass designed to train people in European citizenship in practice. This is all a part of the Transeuropa Caravans project, which aimed at mobilizing European citizens to be more politically aware and vote in the EP elections in May this year. 4 caravans set out in May. There's one more caravan left, which is going from Croatia through Slovenia and then Italy, and will conclude the project in Palermo with the Transeuropa Festival at the beginning of November. As a deliverable and as a really big aim of this project, we try to train the trainers to make them aware of the European citizens' rights. And then a part of this you will see in today's presentations. What you won't see is a very innovative list of 15 to 20 facilitation techniques, as we call them, or techniques which try to translate all this knowledge on EU citizenship into engaging techniques to attract European citizens who are not interested in politics to finally become interested in transnational politics. You know, things like theater, workshops, debates, etc. But because we already have very active citizens in the audience here at SECO today, there is no need for facilitation techniques, and we'll jump straight to it. This is the agenda for today. We're gonna use the approved ECIT methodology of discussing EU citizens' rights, and then I will yield the floor to Jess from the Good Lobby, who will speak about participation and ways of citizens assuming the role of lobbyists in order to enforce their rights. And we will conclude with Gosia from European Alternatives, who will speak about the sense of belonging to the EU as a result of these processes of participation and right enforcement. And she will not speak in abstracto, she will speak about belonging from the perspective of the best practices and results of the Transeuropa Caravans project. So here we are, Petar, Jess, Gosia. You have our contacts, and we are always available for you for any follow-up for the presentation. We want to use, this is like a prototype of a model of a practical pocket guide to EU citizenship, and we really are keen to hearing your feedback on whether it works or not. I will start with something a bit geeky to start the discussion on who citizens are, in fact, and that the birth of citizenship as a category is related to the fact that citizens become active participants in the political life and are no longer considered just subjects who just listen to the authorities above. There are 2 approaches in theory about conceptualizing the evolution of citizenship. One of them looks at the evolution of citizenship bottom up. You have Marshall's theory of citizenship from 1950, which is classical and quite famous. You know, he looks at the UK and social movements in the UK who first struggled to get civic rights, then struggle for political rights, and then lastly for economic and social rights. And this is more or less the model which exists in any nation state. You also have Turner speaking about bottom-up struggles of social movements to gain recognition as citizens. On the other hand, you have Mann and all these kind of theories who state that citizenship is also a top-down project. States are created, and in order for states to gain legitimacy from the people, you introduce something called citizenship, which hasn't existed before. If we look at European citizenship, it started off as a top-down project. It was introduced in an intergovernmental conference during the Maastricht Treaty by the Spanish government in '92. But in the meanwhile, in these last 25 years, what we've witnessed is that it gained life also as a bottom-up initiative where citizens from the grassroots started feeling as European citizens, and this was epitomized never better than in the last European elections, where the turnout was in fact what we claim, all three of us, a result of this transnational grassroots mobilization. It wasn't the good parties doing their job, it was the citizens taking the election as a banner in their own hands. So we need to speak about European citizenship not just as a juridical concept, as a bundle of rights written in the treaties. We need to speak about enacting European citizenship as citizens from the bottom up. So who are the European citizens, you ask? They aren't just the 15 million people or so who reside and work in a different member state. All of us are European citizens, and it is the antiquated conception of European citizenship that it is only triggered once you work and live and love in a different member state. We need to put political rights from the penumbra of European citizenship into the center of European citizens for all. Okay. So, as you might have heard today, every 3 years the European Commission publishes a report on European citizenship. There is one due at the end of this year or at the beginning of next. And I just want to draw your attention to some data from the previous report on European citizenship, which said that 87% of European citizens are aware of their status of European citizens, which might sound encouraging, but then you go deeper into the report and then you see that the majority of people are not aware of their rights as European citizens. There is much to be done on training people in their EU rights and in these kind of masterclasses and trainings. Now, EU is a complex political animal, there's no doubt about it, but if you look at the basic way decisions are made in Brussels, if you look at the key institutions, the European Parliament, the Council of the European Union and the European Commission, it reflects who the pouvoir constituant in Europe are. It's member state on the one hand and citizens on the other, and the citizens are represented by the European Parliament. So let's try to see how to make this voice stronger. I will now turn to rights, after which I will leave the floor to Jess and to Gosia to speak about participation and belonging. At first, all the rights we used to relate to European citizenship were actually rights allotted only to workers who would live and work in EU member states. And this was the case since the Treaty of Rome until 1992, when European citizenship was finally recognized for the EU. And since then, we've had a series of directives, among which the most important one is the so-called 2004/38 directive, which recognizes all the rights in EU citizenship. And as you can see, these rights are the rights to move and freely reside within the EU and the rights to non-discrimination, about which the judge from the court spoke earlier today, but also political rights, the rights to vote and stand as candidate in the European Parliament and municipal elections, the right to be protected by diplomatic and consular authorities of any other EU country, and then a series of channels of participations of European citizens to petition the Parliament, to write a complaint to the Commission and the Ombudsman, to have a correspondence with European institutions and access these institutions. And the youngest one among the rights for EU citizens is the infamous European Citizens Initiative, which allows 1 million citizens to ask the Commission to legislate on a given subject. Now, I will just briefly go, because this is a mock training, right? We want to just give you the model and then get your feedback, speak about the free movement of persons. We don't really care about the legal basis. We can all go back to it and you can write us in case you're actually in need for some legal advice. But what I want to draw your attention to is what citizens can do themselves without asking for expensive legal help or without contacting the European institutions. In case you're a person exercising your freedom of movement rights, or if your family member is exercising your freedom of movement rights and you're not even a national of an EU member state, there's a cascade system of assistance in place for you. And this, just to let you know, might be sliding right to the bottom and the last point. If there is a problem between you as someone living in a different member state and the local authority which is supposed to implement the directives related to the freedom of movement, but they're not doing their jobs, the court, the municipality, some grumpy clerk in the commune, you first have to get informed about your rights and contact Europe Direct. Then you need to go to your Europe advice, and if by yourself you're not able to resolve your problem, then you have to contact the so-called Solvit network, which I will explain in a second. So let's look at an example. You're contacted by a Polish citizen who is experiencing problems in obtaining a visa for his Ukrainian wife. The couple intend on moving to the Netherlands as the Polish citizen has been offered a job in Utrecht. Bless you. The Ukrainian wife has been informed over the telephone by the outsourcing agent for visa applications that she cannot apply for a Schengen visa to join her husband in the Netherlands under Article 5(2) of the directive. She has been told she must instead apply for a family reunification visa. What is the most appropriate course of action in this couple's case?
You have options to choose.
That would make it a bit too easy. Yes, so one of the questions was whether there are options to choose. But let's be creative, I mean, brainstorm.
So we depart from the departure point that it is right that they have to apply for the family reunification visa. That's the...
That's what they say, but that might not be the right solution.
So contacting the local, let's say, European Union representation on the matter. I don't know exactly which would be the body dealing with this. But
Good. So
my
your
first question would be also like if are we speaking about a married couple or about a couple? Because that's also a very big difference.
Yes, it is.
So this whole issue, like, because there is one sentence about the couple, but then later it comes wife.
Mm-hmm.
So if she's a wife, then the whole issue is not really a big issue, because of course she has the right to stay with her family and with her husband. So she just simply applies in Poland for a visum, and then she gets one that she goes to any country of the European Union with.
Okay, good. So the acquis says that family members are entitled to all the rights of other family members who are members, who are citizens of member states, and there is also an extensive case law of the European Court of Justice in this regard, so it would also apply for de facto spouses, it would apply to same-sex spouses, and I mean there is an extensive case law. But of course, as a citizen just moving, you're not obliged to know all this, so you need to know who to contact. And as I said in the previous slide, you should first contact Europe Advice, where there is a very clear information point online for you before contacting Solvit. If you still encounter problems with the stubborn outsourced hypothetical center, then you need to contact Solvit, which is a network of people, legal experts on EU law dedicated to help you, and here you see how it works. You have a Solvit center in the country where you reside and the Solvit center in the country where you're going to move, for example, and they will sort it for you in a very limited time frame. So there is a network in place without even involving expensive lawyers, expensive or hard to reach legal authorities in different member states translating documents for you to resolve any issues you encounter in the exercise of your freedom of movement rights. Now we are running on a limited time here, and I will just then briefly ask, has everyone today learned what the European Citizens Initiative is? Raise a hand. Good. Good. Yes, so that means we can be very brief. 1 million people can sign a petition of a sort. It's actually a legislative initiative, which in the case of the EU is not so much a legislative initiative as much as it is an agenda-setting tool, asking the Commission to start a process of legislation on a European law that the citizens are concerned with. There's so much to be said about this, but as I said early this morning, the most important takeaway is that the new regulation on ECIs will make it much more user-friendly, and that this instrument, in spite of the fears before, isn't dead but is thriving, and citizens are really participating. I'm just gonna give you a couple of most important examples which might inspire you for organizing your own ECI in the near future. The most controversial one is Stop TTIP. More than 3 million people signed it. It was first not registered by the Commission. A lot of people thought it's because it had a neoliberal agenda and wanted to have a trade treaty with the United States. But then the court, 3 years after, said that it should have been registered, so good for the TTIP. The treaty wasn't signed, so with or without registration, they did a good job. Water is a human right, a positive example that made the EU make a new revised drinking water directive. Stop vivisection. We all want animals not to be used for testing, but it actually kind of failed because, well, even though it reached 1 million citizens, the EU said we were taking care of it, and even instances like Oxford University said we need animal testing. So sometimes it doesn't really work. One of the more controversial ones is One of Us, where you had a lot of people from more conservative Christian backgrounds trying to stop the EU from financing projects which relate to embryo testing, and indirectly then also abortion. In this case, the European Union did not legislate further. And finally, a success story, Stop Glyphosate. What I will give you here, and I can share with any of you who are interested in the presentation after, is an exercise in actually voting for an ECI. It takes not more than 2 minutes. An exercise in looking what the ongoing ECIs are. Just sparkle your imagination. One of them is Greta Thunberg, sort of flagship ECI. And finally, to go on the ECI forum and start finding partners for your future ECI. And with this, we get to chess and participation.
Yeah. Anybody has an idea of how many lobbyists there are in Brussels? Yeah.
25,000?
25,000. So I just wanted to emphasize the fact that that's a very, very large number. Just to give you an idea, in Washington, D.C., there are 13,000 lobbyists. So that's basically the double. And I did this little thing. I counted, I searched for how many people live in Brussels, like Brussels City or Brussels 1000, and it's 174,000 people. So by making that counting, 1 person out of 7 in Brussels Center is a lobbyist.
Hold on, Mike.
Wow.
Anybody who's a lobbyist here? All right. Safe place. Safe environment. So
You never know.
you never know. You know.
Poker face.
So what is a lobbyist? Where are they? Where do they hide? Do they secretly meet? They live all together? It's a lot of them. Again, to give you an idea, 25 times, if they created their own state, it would be 25 times the Vatican City. So it's a lot of them. So what is lobbying? What is lobbying for you? Who is, in your opinion, a typical lobbyist? I want to hear from you.
Well, the big industries, that's what I would consider lobbyists. Yeah.
How would you define a lobbyist?
Well, interestingly enough, we had this discussion this afternoon actually,
Nice.
and I associate lobbyists very negatively. Whereas the person we were talking with, she had the exact opposite of it, and of course it's two sides of the coin.
Must have been a great discussion, I believe.
It was,
We can
But
continue
my
it here.
first impression is that it's kind of a negative profession.
Mhm.
But yeah,
We'll get to that soon, but
yeah.
what do lobbyists do?
Well, a lobbyist is contacting those who have the power to legislate, to apply rules, and make sure they take into account his interests.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a quite clear definition. I've got a more formal one, but it's basically what you said. So they want to persuade someone who has power, usually an elected member of government, to support laws and rules that, of course, give you an advantage. It's important that you're doing it not just randomly, but within your interest. she already answered to this question, but anybody else? Do you think lobbying is good? Lobbying is bad? Lobbying is just a tool?
Sometimes it's necessary because not all MPs know what they are or what they have to get some insight. It can be positive also.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I didn't have time to answer your question, but I'm a lobbyist for an organization that I will not name, but it's in the energy sector. So it's a very complex sector, in which there's some expertise and some data and fact that are necessary to provide to MEPs or to members of the commission. Simply, of course, the final aim is to advocate and to defend our position, but there is also a kind of a job of pedagogy, to explain what's at stake and what's really at stake, and then it's up to the MEPs to make his decision. But at least you can provide some information. Just say what you're about to vote is going to lead to that kind of consequences. So yeah, once again, the final objective is to advocate, but there's also this kind of explanation job, which is, in my opinion, very useful, particularly in sectors such as energy. But it's the case in, I don't know, defense or many other sectors. So yeah.
Yeah, you touched a great point.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's perfect symbiosis.
Yeah.
Like even if each of them is acting for their own interest, it's still like working for the public interest.
Yeah,
So,
this is some kind of, because we represent many jobs. In my case, it's the case. So yeah, you're not speaking only for your private small interests. It's small. It's bigger than that. So yeah, I would answer your question, but I think it's quite useful many times.
And beyond that, what I think, that's a very good point, but on a more theoretical kind of perspective, lobbying is fundamental for our democracy. What's happening with lobbying? People are acting within their own interest to have a voice heard. We're gonna get to this in a second, but it's a core activity of democracy, right? Because you elect people, and then they need some input. They need to know what you want. So we'll get there in a second. So just a very quick question. How many of you think Coca-Cola lobbies? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you think, how many of you think that Google lobbies? How many of you think that churches or religion association lobby? Yeah. How many of you think that cities lobby? Okay. And how many of you think that citizens can lobby? It's still good, more than the average. Yeah, the answer, or at least in my perspective, is yes, citizens can lobby. There are plenty of stories. I don't think now I have the time to go through all of them, but the most clear example, in my opinion, is Greta Thunberg, because she, without wanting it maybe, but she imposed her agenda to most of the decision makers in the world. She's a lobbyist. She did a lobbying activity. Yet, most of us still feel very powerless.
Yeah, my question is, I also saw the word there, but what would you say is the difference between an activist and a lobbyist? Because I have the feeling that a lot of people consider lobbyists to be from the big bad corporations who pay off politicians, and everybody that's an activist is from like the social movement fighting for rights, and I would say most people consider Petar to be an activist, not a lobbyist.
In the sector, usually the distinction is between lobbying and advocacy. NGOs are allergic to the term lobbying. But at the end of the day, when you do advocacy, we can discuss on an academic kind of perspective, but the main thing, as the gentleman was saying, is that you want to change the law. So if you're an activist and you're out of the parliament and you're just shouting, instead of proposing some concrete actions to be taken, you're not really doing some lobbying, right? Greta Thunberg, she's more an activist, or at least she started more like as an activist, but it turned out being lobbying, because laws are changing because of her. So that's the answer to your question. I don't know if it's clear. But usually it's more advocacy, right? It's broader. So yeah, we feel powerless and we feel like we can do much less than these big corporations. An infographic that comes from this website is called Integrity Watch from Transparency International. There's a list of the 10 top organizations that have lobbied the European Commission in 2019. Those numbers below, I don't know if you can read them, is the numbers of meetings they had with commissioners. And what I really find interesting in this is that you have 2 organizations representing civil society: consumers, transport and environment. And it's interesting to see that they have been lobbying more than Microsoft and Facebook. Not bad. But if we go on the right side, you still see it's a very small slice of the cake. And corporations still have 75% of the lobbying activities. So there is a lot to be done. So the question is business overrepresented? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, probably.
I have to say no. Nobody dares to say no.
I say no. I think civil society is underrepresented. And we go back to my initial point. I'm sorry to disagree with all of you guys, but business is doing business. There's nothing wrong with that. It's democracy. That's the rules of the game. The problem is somewhere else. What's civil society? So I don't know if you still disagree with it, but we identified this problem. So it's not the bad guys, it's where are the good ones.
I do disagree to a certain extent because businesses, I mean, they have the means to be represented because they have they have money, they have people working for them that represent also their own economic interest, whereas civil society, well, I work myself for civil society, so I can say that for sure we have less financial means than businesses, so well, we are underrepresented, or do we have less opportunities than business have? So that's
this is a conversation that we could have for
yeah.
a long time. In my opinion, money is not all. I know it's hard to say this thing in society, but Greta Thunberg is somehow the proof of the fact that it's not all about money. And I don't think commissioners or members of parliament are all just about money. Sometimes it's about something beyond that. But
Power?
again, we could discuss about it a lot.
Power?
Well, money and power sometimes are very combined with each other, but you can create power. I mean, we're the people. I mean, if you look at numbers, people have the power. Again, it's a broader conversation.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm afraid if you have no money, at least enough money, and maybe not as much as big industrial sectors, your actions will be of short duration and will fall empty. That's my opinion. Most of the civil society organizations have a life duration of less than 2 years.
Yeah, sometimes business as well, but yeah, I completely agree. Anyway, sorry, we don't have a lot of time. I would like to discuss this very long. Just a very quick thing. I was doing this research the other day, very data-driven, and I found out that civil society that lobbies in Brussels has a total budget of something like 60 billion euros declared. I don't know, it's a very rough estimate, and they declare to spend only $500 million in lobbying. So it's also about how you invest money, not just about how much money you have. But I'm sorry, if you want, we can continue the conversation in front of a drink, otherwise.
Where do they get the money from?
What's that?
Where do they get that?
That's another bigger conversation.
Okay.
So at the moment, the only 2 ways that citizens think they can engage in politics is 1, run for office, and 2, vote for their representatives. Stop. They don't actually think they can engage in other kind of activities, or at least the majority. And at the moment, we have these 2 moments of elections, 4, 5, 6 years, but what happens in between? So that's what we believe in the good lobby. That's our how we believe things can change. So more active citizens, more accountable policy processes, and more informed citizens. This is our mission. How we do it is through education and trainings and legal pro bono matchmaking. This is just, I'm just going to go very quickly through this, some workshops and trainings that we've been doing all across Europe, in Paris, Zagreb, Brussels, everywhere. And we have different formats. This is just a taste of what we usually do. And then the second part is matchmaking. This is something I'm much more into. So there are these practices that exist with corporations, by the way, pro bono, providing expertise for free. Specifically, lawyers are very keen to contribute and work for causes they believe in. I recently had a firm that worked for like 150 hours. It's like, I don't know, like 250,000 euros, something like that, for an NGO composed of 3 people. So it's not always about money. And then you got corporate social responsibility, volunteering, all these things combined can professionalize civil society. This is what we believe in, and this is what we're trying to do. And we just connect the dots. It's not like we reinvent the wheel. We connect NGOs with the professional environment. Because at the end of the day, people that work for corporations are still human beings, and they still believe in a specific cause. We developed a guide on how to become what we call a citizen lobbyist. These are 10 steps. I wanted to go through them one by one very briefly, but basically it's you pick your battle, you choose something you really care about, something you're passionate about, you do your homework, you become an expert in that specific issue. You can debate about it with other experts. You do a stakeholder mapping, fundamental. On that specific issue, who else is involved? On one side and on the other one. Who are your potential allies? Who are your potential enemies? I just met, we were talking about ECIs, and I just met this guy. They're running an ECI on taxing kerosene. I don't know if you know about it.
Yeah. Passing by the parliament.
Yeah, correct. And so they want to start having taxes applied to kerosene in the aviation field. They did a really, really smart thing, which is part of the stakeholder mapping. They contacted the Pan-European Organization of Train Producers. And now they're going to partner with them. Because if you start taxing kerosene, the price of tickets is going to go higher, and people are going to go into trains. That's a very smart way of moving, right? You pick your allies, even if they're corporate bad guys. They're helping you on your public interest issue. Plan, this is what I'm going through in a minute. I promise I'll go fast. Coalition building is the result of the stakeholder mapping. So once you know everybody on the chessboard, you pick your allies. Raise money, no need to cover this, we already did. Media outreach, communication strategies, fundamental. Pick a platform and communicate effectively. Of course, get to meet the politicians and the decision makers. And then, even if you win a battle, remember you didn't win the war. So keep on staying vigilant, always aware, and monitor all the developments of the issue. And then stick to the rules. This is something that applies normally to lobbyists. For citizens, it's not a huge issue, but it's also always good to not be naive. So there are some rules that you have to follow. So specifically for the number 4 plan, there is the toolkit. We identified the 5 avenues of participation. So campaigning, legislative, administrative, judicial, and political. But specifically today, I'm going to focus on legislative, administrative, and judicial. Very quick, let's go with the legislative. So in Europe, you have these different avenues of participation. We already spoke about the ECI. I have a case study, and we also may have a testimony here because he also studied with our founder and director, Alberto Lemanno. He initiated an ECI to end the roaming charges for phones. It was, I think, in 2014 or something. The ECI wasn't very successful, as most of the ECIs we know, but it brought the issue inside the corridors of power, and then some people recognized that the fact that it was approved is even because of this ECI. But you can also go in the very traditional way, just preparing a draft directive, so going straight to the legislator and proposing some amendments or articles. Thank you. Speaking so fast. Amendments to the legislator. We did this with Transparency International, and this led to the approval of the whistleblower directive that was approved this year. Administrative, these are, let's say, my favorites. They're very simple, very user-friendly, very accessible for all citizens. So we start with freedom of information requests. It's a very good way to access information, and it can be used in a very strategic way. You can access the list of the meetings, the minutes of meetings, the notes from meetings. During the past decades, there's been an increased amount of laws that regulate this issue in different jurisdictions. In Europe, we have asktheu.org. It's very easy. You can try it right now. You need to access a document, a meeting, or whatever. You go on the platform and you ask. Straightforward. If they deny it, because they can deny it, sometimes it's part of the law. There are some things you don't want to know as a citizen.
Like the phone
That's
ringing
what
at the right moment.
all expected. That's when the ombudsman comes into play. Sorry, I made this meme. I hope you find it a little bit funny. The ombudsman is a mediator figure, so between the public administration and the citizen. In Europe specifically, we have the European Ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly. She's doing an amazing job. She's almost at the end of her mandate. She investigates complaints about maladministration by EU institutions, bodies, and agencies. And if she finds that there's been maladministration, she expresses recommendations and adopts decisions that in turn create pressure on the decision makers. As you can see, the combination of these two tools, you ask for documentation and the ombudsman, can be very strategic. And if in both cases it fails, you can go to court and you have like some proof. You see, I went to the decision maker and he just closed the door on me. This brings me to the very last case. Judicial, no need for a huge introduction about this. You know, that's the European Court of Human Rights, European Court of Justice. Just have this very quick case study. You guys all know Matteo Salvini. Yeah. Cross fingers. Next week he shouldn't be anymore part of the Italian government. Somebody could disagree with this, but that's again another conversation. So what happened about 2 years ago is that there was this boat with about 150 migrants approaching Italy, crossing the Mediterranean, and he just all of a sudden said, no, they're not going to enter in our territory. There are kids, women, people in need, and he just said no. 1 day, 2 days, people complaining on Twitter, Facebook, journalists writing on newspapers, nothing. He wouldn't change his mind. 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, people protesting in the streets, nothing. The 7th day, this public prosecutor in Sicily decided to go in court and sue him for kidnapping 150 people. And the same day, these people were arriving in Italy. This gives you an idea of how powerful the judicial avenue can be. But, of course, compared to the other ones, the other avenues that are more user-friendly and accessible to citizens, this requires a certain level of expertise, sometimes money. And that is why I go back to the matchmaking part that we do. I have a legal background myself. Find lawyers. There are plenty of lawyers out there that can help you. If you can't find them, come to us and we'll see what we can do about it. But even if you have a case in court, lawyers is the recommendation. So again, I don't think you have any kind of question. Sorry, I didn't integrate it in with your presentation, but being a European citizen is not just about having rights, but it's also about activating yourself. And a great Italian singer said in one of his songs that freedom is participation. So to be a citizen, it's not just about wanting, but it's also about giving. And this is my conclusion. Feel free to get in touch. So the very last thing, I promise it's 30 seconds. We are having an action, we're beginning an action and asking the European Parliament to start an investigation for European parties, specifically EPP and ACRE, for their failure in having political families inside their political parties inside their European families that do not comply with European values, specifically Poland, peace and law and justice.
Law and Justice is the Polish party.
I can make it.
Fidesz.
I don't know anymore. Law and Justice and Fidesz.
Yeah.
So we're asking the European Parliament to do so. We already tried once, but now we need 50 signatures on the paper. So if anybody wants to take part of this or discuss it further,
Sure.
please.
Let's sign up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jess.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, and we will now move on to belonging. So after knowing our rights and participating through all the wonderful channels that Jess has shown us, let's see how we can belong to Europe. And without further ado, Gosia, please.
Thank you. Could you launch the...
Yes.
Okay, so I was supposed to come here and talk about belonging, to add another magic ingredient to the European citizenship. And yes, it's true that I wrote a whole book about it as well, which was my PhD, but I will make it very easy, as I understand it, as I experience it. So I came to you straight from Berlin, because I work for European Alternatives, who are running a project together with ECIT and a Polish organization called Krytyka Polityczna, which is called Transeuropa Caravans. But another part of me, and like a big part of me actually, is being an activist myself. And if I think of belonging and of what is happening in my country at the moment, and I'm Polish, is that I really do not identify with the politics of the current government at all. I don't support what they do. I don't like the fact that as soon as the Law and Justice, so the Polish ruling party, took power 4 years ago, they removed the EU flag from the room. So now when you see our Prime Minister, there are no European flags anymore in the room. That was a symbolical beginning of what then happened afterwards. They also they reject to translate the legislation of the European Court of Justice. So what our ombudsman did was to ask people, civil society, to help him translate it, so that people took it in their hands. So I do not approve of what the government is doing, but I still have a very, very strong feeling of belonging to my polity, which is Poland. And no matter where I live, I try to support people and ideas that I think actually are there. Maybe not that visible at the moment, because what you hear is probably a very negative image of Poland, I guess. But believe me, there's still a very strong civil society. And so I have my personal reasons why to support this project of Transeuropa Caravans, not only because I'm managing it with Petar and our Polish friends, but also because there is a lot of beauty and hope in it. Actually, when we recruited our trainers, or activists that then became trainers, some of them were doubtful whether spreading a positive image of Europe will be actually catchy enough. And we asked this question ourselves, but then we saw so many positive examples of what they experienced through their roads, and the trip they took, that we have no doubts actually that there is a sense in it. So what happened is that in May, 4 groups of people traveled across Europe. There were 12 countries that they crossed, let's say, and 3 more to come in October and November this year. So as you can see, we had 4 routes in May. Central Eastern route going through Germany, Austria and Hungary under the topic of civic spaces under pressure. Then the Western route going through France, Spain, Portugal, connected by the topic of cities of solidarity. Then the Visegrad route going through Poland, Czech Republic and Slovakia on culture and theater. And then the Baltic route that ECIT was coordinating going through Sweden, Finland and Estonia, focused on sustainability and climate change. Then we are waiting for the last route to set off in October and November, the Mediterranean route going through Italy, Slovenia and Croatia on migration. And they will go to they will end up with the Transeuropa Festival in Palermo, which will be an exciting event, I think. So just to make it very clear for you, well, people really got on these cars and went through Europe. They were recruited and trained and prepared as much as we could actually get everybody ready to talk about EU citizens' rights and discuss Europe. They had amazing encounters. They put themselves in completely new situations. They joined demonstrations. They talked to elderly people. They talked to youth. They were everywhere. Were you lucky enough to join them for some part of the route?
I wish I could have. I was really just helping them from the Brussels office, but just to give you a flavor of what they did, our Baltic and Scandinavian route ended up in the civic space organized in a sauna. So people from different civil society organizations in Scandinavia have a sauna which was built upon what used to be a dumpster space. But it then was occupied by citizens. They turned it into a sauna, and at a given time of the day, of a given day of a week, people from different civil society groups will informally meet in this sauna and discuss how to build bridges between each other. So
So now, if we want to think about it in the meta level, true, these activists and trainers were trying to find other active people on the ground in little villages, in bigger cities, and give visibility to them through spreading good practices. But then we actually realized, and it's one of the outcomes of our project, is that even though you may be very, very active at the local level, it doesn't really mean that you have any kind of a feeling of belonging or sense of belonging or attachment to the EU. So what they're trying to do was to actually shift people's attention or discuss things that they may not normally think of while they do their job on the ground. And that was an educational experience for all of us. Again, I don't really think we have time for many examples, but I've learned a lot through their experience. They met people, inspiring politicians as well, people who started as social movements and then went to politics, or are running cities or little towns in a collective manner. So here you can see them with the flag, or when I listened to the stories of Central Eastern Caravan, which went through Austria and ended up in Budapest. What they did, of course, was they tried to find positive aspects of being an active citizen in Budapest at the moment. So they found really inspired people who, yes, are under legal and administrative pressure, but they still go on and they still move on. They try to do their things as much as they can. Another thing, because I think in our masterclass description, it also said that we will give some idea on how to support European citizenship, wasn't it so?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to, as an educator or a coordinator as well myself, I want to tell you that if you work on this feeling of belonging or try to work on people's emotions and then you ask them to be multipliers or trainers or spread ideas, there is some certain level of unknown of what they will do with these ideas. I mean, we were trying to convey some messages and prepare them to set off, but then what they actually went through and the experiences they had, well, we could not expect what would happen.
No.
So that's a very interesting educational experience. And then I actually asked myself, sure, feeling of belonging, but to what? What do I sign up for? I mean, what is this Europe? And I realized throughout the years that I don't really have to have a finished answer to that, because as I say here, Europe is in the making, it's in the process, and it's not done yet. So as long as I feel attached to the idea, I think I will be ready to stand for that, just as I am for Poland.
Thank you, Gosia.
That was very fast.
That was very fast. You really compensated for potentially the two of us speaking too much. Thank you for that. I got my credentials to enter the European Parliament only a few months back with the ECIT Foundation. Before that, my friends working in the Parliament would just let me in. And I was
So we
surprised.
do have another lobbyist in the room.
Yeah.
See?
And I'm,
The numbers start to
Then we
match.
have to-
no, but it
Your
came to me
hand.
now that my
Hold your hand
credentials
and
say
go
I'm a
toilet with you.
lobbyist. Yeah. So yeah, my credentials say I'm a lobbyist. Yeah, but it was remarkably easy to get the card. But every time you want to step into the parliament, you have to activate the credentials. So it's a bit of a hassle. That's true.
Why?
You know, they say security issues.
Why? They let you in anyway, so you're secure. So it's just,
Yeah, I mean, power does what power does. They try to limit
No.
curtail
No,
our
they have
influence.
limited power also.
Exactly, but it's what Jess said. The institutional power is the power of the people. If we can sort
It
of
was not like that before,
yeah,
some time before.
We have to
Yeah.
explain
You
it to
think.
them again. Right?
yeah,
We have to be reminded about it.
Can I would like to add one thing to that. It's actually a theoretical framework, but it explains a lot to me and what I get trouble with when it comes to the EU. Because I also come from a feminist background, so we try to lobby in the European Parliament. Actually, the European Parliament, the members of the European Parliament invited us, many times, to talk to them. And then the wall we faced each time was that the Commission said, or themselves, they said that the right to the access to abortion is not in the competences of the EU, so they can't help. Now, if you look at the theoretical framework of the European citizenship, it's not only rights, participation and belonging, but it's also the membership, so who we define a part of the community, who is entitled to gain these rights that you're talking about, who is entitled to participate, and then there's this responsibility mix, which is a set of competences that a polity, let's say European Union, has towards us as citizens. In this case, the EU telling us that something doesn't lie in their competences, like the access to abortion, the right to abortion, gives us this feeling of hitting a wall with
We're
your head.
half citizens.
yeah.
Citizens solely for their competences.
Yeah, I mean, we can complain about Poland, but sorry, we can help you, right? And then you have this governance responsibility, which also covers for how, to what extent you can participate in policy making in a polity. I really like this idea because it's pretty innovative, and I think that actually was developed because of the political system of the EU, really, because no other well, maybe Sweden, but Poland for sure wasn't the example on which this was built.
The idea of accountability that is in the core of the problem of the democratic deficit of the EU, that all of a sudden the EU is either unaccountable or unable to fulfill the demands from the civil society. So good, yeah.
And of course, we have to always remember that the EU is a very unique and particular creature. We never saw it before in history. It's a political experiment. We're still finding out what the consequences will be.
Yeah, and we're still finding out how we can improve it. And this is a part of the show, part of the experiment. Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you represent civil society groups yourselves? Yes, most of you. What? Do you work on European citizenship as well?
Yes.
As a
My name is Suzanne, I'm from Portugal, and I belong to the International Federation of Environmental Health. And at the same time, I'm in a civil society group with the WHO and the health associations to make some lobby also relating climate change and health issues. So, yeah.
Very interesting.
Good. So the right person for the workshop. Okay.
I think, you asked for feedback. I think one of the major issues that I think some people face, including myself, is sort of how do you go from the individual? Do you know, in the steps? One of the things that I have seen it, you then ended up encountering those who are like-minded, and then you become eventually in associations, so on. I think what will be very interesting for the materials would be how do you start from the one to the next, because one of the things that I have noticed, I lived in Brussels before in the late 90s, and now I moved here in 2015. And the whole scene, I would say, of advocacy has changed completely. To the point where you have, like the lady said, you have more and more, barriers, in fact, even to speak up as an expert on your subject, to say, I am here because I believe ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And I'm just even wondering, for instance, in terms of this business of the access, to the policymakers, when you are as an expert and not as an association, it will be an interesting exercise to see, for example, to say, why couldn't we have a list of individuals who say, I can prove my expertise, I don't have an association, but I'm not only speaking on my behalf, but actually when I go, I'm speaking on behalf of others. Because I think that this is becoming a real barrier. So for instance, when you have certain, I will give a very concrete example. You have once a year in Brussels the Migration Forum. And if you are not associated with an organization, you are automatically barred from participating. But you can be somebody who had 15, 20 years working on the subject. And so I think that it could be an exercise to foresee it, sort of like, how do you yourself, started this process?
Yeah, that's a legitimate objection, but also it's a paradox, because the whole point with the civil society bubble in Brussels is that we say we represent the interest of European citizens, even though no one elected us to represent the interest of European citizens. So our representative capacity is what this theoretician of representation Pitkin calls is symbolic. We say we act on behalf of citizens without actually ever getting the mandate from the citizens, because we know that our views reflect those of the median citizen. Whereas on the other hand, you're saying there is an opposite trend of, outcasting individuals just because they're not members of an association. So yes, a lot of contradictions in the civil society world here that we need to take. And indeed, these kind of projects which are horizontal, for which just to do a bit of PR for this space, the renting for a square meter here, 75 euros per year. So if you want one space, you pay 75 euros, and you're set for a year, right? Lowering the barriers for actual citizens to have a say in Europe and start to network with other citizen lobbyists, associations and stuff.
And that door remains open.
Oh yeah.
So if you need, if you have expertise to share, if you want to get involved,
this space will not build a barrier for you.
Exactly.
Well, you can also come to Berlin.
Oh yeah?
Come on, it's not only about Brussels, right?
No, we're making a transnational network of no barrier spaces for citizens, right? Okay, on that optimistic note, we're gonna end it now.
Yes.
Guys, thank you so much for participating and listening to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you to the camera person.
Thank you, Aurelio.
No, they're putting barriers to journalists. They are.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I